I'll be talking to you about the use of interactive text surveys in public health research, and I'm going to move from extreme environments to something really recurrent and really familiar, which is bedtime routines in families with young children. So, as we already talked briefly about, when you use traditional mainly paper-based assessments of health-related behaviors, you can come across some limitations. Those limitations can potentially influence the quality of the data. You may have low return rates depending on the way you try and distribute and collect your questionnaires, and you could potentially face issues around recall bias when these questionnaires take a retrospective approach to assessing health-related behaviors. That is the reason why an ever-increasing number of organizations and government agencies around the world, for example, the Federal Drug Administration in the US, is now urging companies and individuals to use electronic data capture as their default measurement of health-related behaviors in a way to overcome all the issues around traditional paper-based assessments. So on that note, despite being one of the most basic functions, text messages can potentially hold a lot of potential, and that potential can be around tackling the traditional limitations of the paper-based measurements, but also creating a better experience for the participants and allow for cost-effective real-time data collection. The use of mobile phones is at the highest that it's ever been all around the world. We see over 90% use of mobile phones in developed Western economies, but also in economies and countries like Mexico, China, and our developed countries. We see more than 70% of the population having an access to a mobile phone. That is not necessarily a smartphone, but it could be any mobile phone device. When it comes to text messaging in particular, despite the rise of the instant messaging platforms, text messages are still a really popular function. The latest data, for example, in the US show that people use on average about 250 text messages, and in other countries like the UK, text messages are normally a free added-on feature for most subscriptions. And when it's not free, the cost is really low per unit compared to other functions like data usage. And especially when it comes to people from lower socioeconomic statuses and deprived areas, research has shown that these people not only have similar access to mobile phones, but they've seemed to prefer and they've been using more text messaging compared to other groups. That then raises a unique opportunity to potentially target groups like that sometimes have been disenfranchised and not used widely in research. The main objective for our study was to try and develop an interactive text survey assessment for bedtime routines, and we tried to use a stepped approach where we utilized user feedback along the way to make improvements and change the assessment as we went along. We chose bedtime routines because it is a difficult area to assess. There is only one standardized paper-based questionnaire widely used on bedtime routines, and that questionnaire takes a retrospective approach focusing on the 30 days before. But bedtime routines is something dynamic, it's something that happens on the spot. Every family has a bedtime routine, and is one of the single activities that families do every single night. So we were really interested to get to know all these little dynamic behaviors that occur during bedtime routines. And most importantly, bedtime routines have shown to have health-related implications around quality of sleep, dental health, school performance, all the way to family functioning and child-parent interaction. The stepped approach we used started from public and patient involvement work. From that, we moved to the development of our pilot interactive text survey assessment. We ran a pilot study. We used the feedback and the results of the pilot study to evaluate and redevelop the assessment. And finally, we ran a larger study to test the more improved version of the interactive text survey. Our PPI work was with 15 families, all of whom had the young children, and they all lived around Manchester. And we basically asked them a few questions on what would be the preferred method of asking them questions about their bedtime routines. We presented to them options like doing the questionnaire that's been widely used in the past, doing audio diaries, written diaries, going online and complete an assessment at the end of the day. But the result was all of them chose the text messaging as the most convenient and easy way for assessing bedtime routines. And they all basically agreed that it's due to time constraints, because getting a text message was easy for them to read, reply quickly, and they don't have to worry about finding the assessment online or completing it on paper. Based on the PPI work, then we did a pilot study with 50 families, all of which had children between 3 and 7 years old. The majority of the parents were females, which is quite expected in that type of research with young children. They were about 35 years was the mean age, and most of them came from really deprived areas around Greater Manchester, with most of them being of white ethnic background. In order to develop the interactive text survey, we did some preliminary tests within the researchers of the dental health unit where I'm based. And we just tried to figure out what is the best way of phrasing the questions and what is the best delivery method. And then we partnered with a private company called PatientComms that specializes on text message solutions. And they helped us to develop that interactive text survey assessment that we then delivered to the parents' mobile phones. When it came to the larger study, after the pilot study, we used 200 families, again with the same children, same age for the children. Again, most of them were females, again from really deprived areas around Greater Manchester, but this time we had a different ethnic composition with a big part of the population being of Asian and British Asian ethnic background, and that reflected this particular areas of Greater Manchester where we recruited. Instead of using the private company for the larger study, we opted in to use readily available platforms. We did find, dealing with a private company, that we were only a small part of their operations. It was really difficult, and it resulted in a lot of delays getting stuff back to us, and also the cost was quite significant. So with my supervisor, we used 3 platforms that everyone can access really easily, and all that you have to do is add credits from a credit card or a debit card to use the services. Twilio was the main platform that we used, and it's a platform that allows people to buy mobile phones for any country in the world, put credits, and then send text messages. Texted is another platform that was originally designed by UNICEF in an African project to allow people to report water measurements on their pumps, and that was then later developed into a software that everyone can access and design any type of interactive text survey that they want. And finally, we use Zapier, which is again an online program that allows all these different elements to communicate and connect with one another. So Zapier was like the overseeing platform that monitored the completion of the text messages. So this is a quick summary of the 2 measurements. The one in the pilot study was developed in collaboration with a private company. The retest study was the one that we developed on our own. And as you can see, pretty much they are the same assessments, and actually in the retest study, because we had the ability to do things on our own, we managed to add more questions and specific questions, an example on parental mood. We kept the assessment on pretty much the same completion time, which was about 1.5 to 2 minutes per night, because we didn't want to take too much time of the parents' daily schedule. We sent the pilot assessment for 5 nights in a row, and the larger study we sent the assessment 7 nights in a row. There was no restriction. We could have sent the assessment for a month, but we just felt that we wanted to keep people as engaged as possible and then see what is the optimum level of sending the assessment. And also we wanted to capture both weekdays and weekends, given that we had some indication and we believed that bedtime routines might be different based on the weekend or a weekend night or a weekday night. So in terms of this is a demonstration of how the assessment looked like when the parents received it every single night. The assessment started with a personalized message, and that was just to make them feel more included and more welcome to the research. So we included their names, and we just let them know that this was the time to complete the assessment. They were given the option to reply right there, but they were also given the option to delay their reply because we knew that maybe something might have gone off that night or they might have been busy. They also had the option every single night to completely opt out of the assessment without any consequences for their participation. We used a series of closed, open questions and also questions on a numeric scale that then allows us to code the data according to the need of the studies. So for example, when we asked them about their mood, we used the easy to understand scale of 1 to 10, giving them examples of what 1 meant, what 10 meant. We also included prompts in every question which reflected what we were expecting them to reply. So for example, when we asked them about whether the child's teeth were brushed that night, we were expecting them to reply yes or no. If they replied something completely different, we were then prompting them to reply based on the filters that we needed to use. And that really helped us later on with coding and with data management, because we didn't have irrelevant data. It was all data reflecting the questions that we wanted them to answer. And every night, the parents were giving the option to opt out completely of the study, and that opt-out was fully automated. If they texted leave at any point, they were removed from our registry. They were receiving the voucher as a compensation up to that point, and we're just getting an email through saying so-and-so subject opted out. So from a research, resource, and time management from our point of view, was really convenient to keep track of who is completing their assessment and for how long. At the end of both the pilot and the larger study, we looked at some key indicators. We looked at the retention rates, response rates, and how many data we were able to collect from each participant. So as you can see, we had a 100% retention rate in the study with the 50 families and 92.5% retention rate in the larger study. We had really good response rate, over 86% in both studies, which is much higher than we would have expected with a traditional questionnaire. Only a small number of people reported having problems. Those problems were mainly due to being busy with something else, and the text messages maybe interfered slightly with their routines. We were able to gather quite a lot of data on each participant in both studies. Obviously, in the retest study, we had a larger number of data points because it was for 7 nights. But even with a 5-night study, we managed to gather at least 30 unique data points on their behaviors for 5 nights. And also, when looking at the cost, we see a big decrease in the cost for the longer study, and that is due to the fact that we used our own software, the readily available software. And also, in this type of studies, the higher the number of participants, the lower the cost, because you can buy bundles of text messages in lower rates early on. Looking at response rates, we see that, for example, in the pink, with the pilot data, there was ups and downs as we went along. Meanwhile, in the retest data, where people had to be engaged for 7 nights in a row, there was a constant decrease in their engagement, but overall it was over 87%, which was a really good response rate. Apart from these key indicators, we also asked feedback from the participants. In the pilot study, we gave anonymized feedback forms at the end. In the larger study, we had a automated feedback system that we sent to them at the end of the study. Overall, participants had a really positive experience participating in our study. They scored an average of 4.5 out of 5, and they actually scored almost the perfect 4.8 out of 5 in terms of how easy it was to receive and reply to the assessment every night. When we asked them some specific questions, for example, if they would prefer to use text messages over other methods, all of them said that they would prefer the text messages for any future research around bedtime routines. We did ask them whether they would like to see a text message-based intervention on their bedtime routines, and more than 0.5% of them said that they would like to potentially see an intervention. And finally, based on their experience in our study, most of them said that they would be happy to take part in future studies that we might do. So some key conclusions when it comes to the 2 studies we ran on the use of interactive text surveys. We do think the interactive text survey was successful in securing not only good quality, but also good quantity of data on a dynamic behavior such as bedtime routines. We do think that interactive text surveys could potentially limit recall bias when it comes to those self-reports of behavior, because there's a really limited time that lapses between the actual behavior and the assessment of that behavior, especially when you compare that to the traditional measurements. And also, interactive text surveys could potentially create a better experience for participants that can then reflect in the retention and response rates, which for some studies, especially longitudinal studies, retention rates and response rates can be a key issue. Some limitations for both the pilot and the larger study. We do still think desirability bias might be an issue, as with any self-reported measure. We didn't compare the interactive text survey to the standardized assessment of bedtime routines, so we didn't really test its construct validity, and we don't know whether we actually assessed their bedtime routines or we might have assessed something different. And also, we need to consider whether the text messages themselves had any intervention effect, because they were actually asking people if they did their routines, so they might have changed their routines just by taking part in the study. And finally, future directions relating to this particular use of interactive text surveys, we think there should be further changes, as we did between the pilot and the retest study. There should be further changes based on user feedback, and that could then potentially reflect in better engagement and better overall experience for the participants. We need to compare our interactive text survey with a standardized measurement to see how they might differ or whether they're actually assessing the same thing. And also we should potentially explore the intervention quality of text messages, not only within bedtime routines, but also within behavioral science in general. And that was it. Try to keep it short.
Lovely, thank you very much.